More than 50 years ago, the U.S. government ended Project Blue Book.
On May 17, 2022, Congress held its first hearing on UFOs in more than 50 years. This video contains some of the highlights, at least the highlights in the eyes of the Black Vault. Join me as we watch together some of the best moments and get some extra information and commentary along the way. Stay tuned. You're about to journey inside the Black Vault. That's right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and taking this journey inside the Black Vault with me. I'm your host, John Greenwald Jr., founder and creator of theblackvault.com. And first off, let me apologize. It took me a couple of days to get what I intended to do days ago, and that was do a live stream, have a lot of fun, maybe open up the phone lines. Well, all of that came crashing down as the plan when, sadly, my 3-year-old had come down with a pretty high fever, turned out to be a double ear infection, and although I'm never happy with those, it's a lot better than going through COVID, so I was a little bit afraid that she may be going through that. So this day and age, a high fever, being lethargic for a dad and a mom, not very fun. But when I could, what I've done here in the last couple of days, and maybe it was a blessing in disguise, was I was able to go through the UAP hearing more times than I want to count, bits and pieces here and there when I could, to try and figure out what the best pieces were to share with all of you. And also try and figure out what the best pieces were for me as a researcher. What could I utilize? What could I use to my advantage in, let's say, FOIA requests or FOIA appeals? Things on the record and under oath, yes, really do speak volumes when you are, let's say, fighting for something under FOIA, writing certain things in appeals and so on. So you always want to look for that kind of stuff. Going through it, it really kind of made me see the value in what this hearing was. And to be honest with you, I'm pleasantly surprised. I see a lot of comments out there in social media land where people were let down. They wanted more. They wanted more. And to be honest with you, I didn't expect this much. So I did put a video out the day or two before the hearing, put some thoughts out there. And of course, just speculation. I had no idea what to expect. But overall, I am pleasantly surprised at what we got, simply because it's a lot more than I thought. Reason is we've got some visuals now. Even though they weren't exciting, I'll go over those with you, but I was surprised that they went there. But then I think it was part of the plan. When you see what they're trying to do, I think that's a big motivator for me. So overall, generally speaking, I wanted to at least say, look, this is a positive development. I always thought that it would be if a hearing ever came to pass. I didn't think it would happen this quickly. I figured we'd maybe be like a year plus out from that. And no matter what, you mutter the words UFOs on Capitol Hill in a hearing with people under oath, that's great because that is all good stuff. But when you look at what actually went down and you look at the people that were testifying and what they couldn't answer, that also is telling. You've heard me say on this channel before that sometimes you get a fully redacted page, and for many that's frustrating. You're thinking, hey, they couldn't release a single word. Why release it at all? Well, I want them to release it because those blacked out pages tell a story. The same with hearings like this. Silly answers that they have to push to a closed or classified setting, meaning they can't let you or I hear it. All of those are frustrating, of course, but telling. And those are the things that you can utilize either in those FOIA appeals or FOIA requests or so on when you go after information and you can see where the sensitive points are. So overall, I think that this was good. Will it happen again? I hope so. I know there's a lot of talk out there that it will, and this is the first of many to come, and I won't be surprised. I think that that was one of the other things that I'll put, generally speaking, on the hearing, that the congressmen that were there seemed generally interested. Most of them. One in particular, I felt just kind of winged it the whole way. But regardless, I mean, some of the questions were really solid. Some of them were really just, where did you come up with that? And other ones were kind of what I called facepalm, which caused me to just go, oh, geez, really? And we'll get to that as well. But some of you may have seen my quote in Politico yesterday where I said just that. About the Wilson Davis documents coming up. We'll go all over that in this video. So here's the deal. I'm going to make this as quick as possible, but it's going to be long. This is one of those deep dive videos where I feel it's just warranted to go in deeper, go over the highlights, play the video for you, and then give some extra information where applicable, some commentary where I feel it's warranted, and go on from there. Normally I have a PowerPoint presentation. This time I have a video. What I'm going to go ahead and do is play the clips, pause at certain points, and we'll just go from there. Let me last say, if you're really kind of not interested in any more commentary here, because you've seen it so many times here in the last few days from so many different people, not a problem. I won't be offended if you turn it off. But if you are interested and want to take this journey with me, let's take a look.
Since the early 2000s, we have seen an increasing number of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft or objects in military-controlled training areas and training ranges and other designated airspace. Reports of sightings are frequent and continuing. We attribute this increase in reporting to a number of factors, including our work to destigmatize reporting, an increase in the number of new systems such as quadcopters and unmanned aerial systems that are in our airspace, identification of what we can classify as clutter, mylar balloons, and other types of air trash, and improvements in the capabilities of our various sensors to detect things in our airspace.
Well, that all sounds great, right? And they give all of those mundane explanations for UFOs that we hear a lot from skeptics and so on. So to congressmen who don't know any better, maybe that would fly. But to anybody that decides to actually look at the information and look at the data that's there and look what the government has already done and said and explained almost a year ago, you'll realize that all of those explanations didn't fit into a single case. There was nothing they could attribute to clutter. There was nothing that they could attribute to those drones or quadcopters. The increase in capability to detect, as Mr. Scott Bray just pointed out, didn't fit into the 143 unidentified cases that they talked about in last year's report. What you're looking at now is a screenshot from the classified version that I got released from the Director of National Intelligence, and it reiterates exactly that. Now, there was one case that they labeled a deflating balloon, and that's fine. That's going to happen. But Scott Bray's leading off his opening statement by giving you a laundry list of explanations which sound perfectly plausible. But when you look at their own report, not a single one fit into any of those categories. But why didn't he tell Congress that?
In the early stages, the task force worked to standardize the reporting mechanisms and processes to make it as easy as possible for personnel to report any engagement so that we were getting that wide range of reporting that we needed. We also spent considerable efforts engaging directly with our naval aviators and building relationships to help destigmatize the act of reporting sightings or encounters. And we worked with naval aviation leadership to provide additional equipment to record any encounter. Navy and Air Force crews now have step-by-step procedures for reporting on a UAP on their knee board in the cockpit and in their post-flight debrief procedures.
Now, even though we knew that there were guidelines that were posted a few years ago for the Navy, this now solidifies an oath that there is a document outlining all the procedures for UAP that is in every aircraft, well, at least according to Scott Bray. Now, why is that important? Well, we know now under oath that that document exists. Now, even though we've safely assumed it, we've seen people talk about it in news articles and stuff, again, about the guidelines. Now it seems like there's a structured document that is in naval aviator and Air Force pilots' aircraft. Now, for a long time, I have had FOIA requests going back about a year and a half, specifically with the United States Air Force, under the assumption that they would have such a thing. But this is one of the examples of an under oath testimony that now becomes gold. Many people may not pick up on it because you don't do FOIAs. You really don't care whether or not that there's a manual or not. But for me, it's gold because that will outline everything that they're looking at. Hopefully we can get it, and I believe we likely could. There might be some redactions in there, but regardless, the form itself that they fill out, or whatever it is that they're instructed to do, hopefully will be releasable. But this solidifies that it exists. So there's no way now, it just cuts them off at the pass of them coming out and saying, hey, sorry, we don't have anything like that. Nothing like that exists. Sorry. Well, now we can solidify that it's there. Again, that may be something that doesn't sound too important to some people, but the moment you have that much, you start carving out the excuses that the U.S. military or the government can give you to deny you access to documents.
Additionally, subject matter experts from a wide variety of fields, including physics, optics, metallurgy, meteorology, just to name a few, have been brought in to expand our understanding in areas where we may not have organic expertise. In short, we've endeavored to bring an all-hands-on-deck approach to better understand this phenomena.
That's fantastic. We really didn't hear a whole lot about what the UAP Task Force, now AOI MSG, or what they call AIMSOG, what they were doing with the reports. But just to kind of connect this to a piece of the puzzle that I posted months ago when I got declassified records from the National Reconnaissance Office, that there is what's called a UAP Task Force advisory panel. And we can see here in the middle, I can't do a pointer as I usually can with PowerPoints, but just look in the middle of this graphic here. An NRO officer on the UAP Task Force advisory panel provided feedback on NRO platforms, sensors, data processing, and information exploitation, and then a bunch of redactions. When I had received these documents, that was never acknowledged before, as far as I know. Again, that's one of those things that's always assumed. We would hope that they would have a list of experts that they would go out and be able to call upon should they need it. But this document solidified it. So I had immediately turned around, filed Freedom of Information Act requests for records relating to the advisory panel and who's on it. Now, anybody who knows anything about FOIA, when it comes to who's on it, may absolutely be redacted. That's exemption B6. So for privacy reasons, especially when you start naming an NRO officer, that becomes very problematic. Not only would that fit into exemption B6 of the FOIA, but there's also statutes with the NRO, with the CIA, with the DIA, which ties into exemption B3, that essentially warrants them to redact everything that connects a human to their agency. So they try and separate, for protection, for security reasons, the identity of individuals. So it may come redacted if I can get anything at all, but it will show how big it is, because maybe the name will be redacted, but the specialty will be there. That may be not redacted. I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller, but you have a lot better chance to get that kind of identifier to somebody versus their name. And that to me is just as important as a name, because it tells me and all of us the specialty that they are focusing on. And that could be incredibly telling for trying to unravel exactly what's going on with the advisory panel and what they're talking about.
So what have we learned so far? Any given observation may be fleeting or longer. It may be recorded or not. It may be observable by one or multiple assets. In short, there's rarely an easy answer. For example, let me share with you the first video that we have here today, which shows an observation in real time.
I was pretty excited when this started to go down. Didn't expect visuals.
There it was. That's, in many cases, that's all that a report may include.
Then I started to get
let down. And in many
other
cases, we have far less than this.
So, What you just saw was one of the videos, and jokingly on Twitter, I had posted the quote-unquote Batman balloon was starting to make an appearance, simply because when you start to look at that, it looks very similar. Now, it ended up not being the same, but regardless, it's the same, essentially, quality. We'll get to one of the funniest parts in the hearing in a few minutes, but here is the full video file that was later released by the Pentagon. I was one of the recipients of it. I posted it immediately on the Black Vault. What I call the raw files, but they are not the raw files from the cockpit source, which is likely, by the looks of it, a phone of some kind, but rather the raw files when the DoD released them. So this is not screen grabs from the stream of the video, but rather the full video itself. Take a look. And it's that fast. Now, here I slowed it down for it comes in at 3 frames. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, and then it's gone. I'll play it again. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3. Now, of course, a lot of people out there like Mick West, they're already analyzing that video because although it's not the raw source, he can immediately go in and start dissecting what's there. Fans of this channel will know, if you don't know Mick West, I mean, he's a self-described debunker. I don't like the word myself. I feel it's more of a demeaning term against somebody because I really respect Mick. We don't always agree. I've seen some stuff, especially of late, of Mick that I really disagree with and have posted responses to. But when it comes down to the end of the day, he's somebody of great value to this conversation. He just is. So he immediately grabbed the video and starts, analyzing it the best that he could and, starts to make conclusions about it, likely being either, I think he said, a balloon or something to that effect. Regardless of what his going theory is, it really starts to make you wonder, number one, is this really the best that they have? And I highly doubt that. But number two, is this intentional? Is this intentional to put this out there that may be likely a balloon or weather balloon or something of that nature, just easily explainable, whatever it may be. Don't write me hate mail. I'm not saying that it is, but regardless, that's what we're seeing already in the days that followed the hearing. Was this intentional? Was this something that they want us to do where we see, quote unquote, the evidence that many will assume that's the best they got because they're not showing anything else. They assume that's the best they got. And then people like Mick come out and conclusively show, or maybe closely to conclusively, I'll select a better word than that, but really kind of put the doubt out there that this is anything spectacular. Maybe that's all part of the plan. Did they strategically choose the worst video that they could to put out there into this public sphere? It's possible, and maybe it plays into a bigger plan. We'll get into that as well.
Individual UAP incidents are resolved. They likely fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or U.S. industry developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, or a other bin that allows for a holding bin of difficult cases and for the possibility of surprise and potential scientific discovery. We stand by those initial results. Since the release of that preliminary report, UAP Task Force database has now grown to contain approximately 400 reports. The stigma has been reduced.
Did you catch that? 400 reports in a database. Remember what I said earlier about picking up on the small things? Some may say, great, 400, cool, that's how many it's grown to. But he solidified that there is a central database. Again, all things that we can assume. And some of you may be wondering why I'm pushing points like these. Because again, it locks in, and with the backing of under oath testimony, there is a database with at least 400 reports in it. So what did I do? Well, you probably guessed it. I immediately filed a case based on Scott Bray's testimony for the entire database, 100% of it. We'll also get into his, we'll call it promise to Congress about transparency. So I think that with the testimony here under oath about the database existence and their drive for transparency, and we'll get to those clips, that will put up a good case for the majority, not everything, but hopefully the majority of these 400 cases to be released to the general public, because he said that's what he wants to do. Now, I put a rather large agreement for the FOIA request of, I think I did $300 to agree. So if they come back and say, well, it's voluminous and there's, 400 reports times however many pages, I've already locked in and allocated a few $100 for that. They may come back for extra money. Now, just so you guys know, I don't take any super chat donations from the YouTube channel or donations on the website and go out to dinner or buy my wife a present. When I say it's 100% into this channel, that's what it goes for. And I literally show receipts. You'll see recently I did a request with NASA, which stretched to about, I think it was $360 that is going to be the payment. And I literally show the receipts. So for those of you that support me on Patreon or decide to do those super chats, it is so incredibly helpful for situations like this because that's what it goes to. Of course, the Black Vault's a little bit expensive to run anyway, but just so you guys know, I always try and show you exactly what those dollars go to, and this is a prime example. So I put in a confirmation to the U.S. Navy for this database that at this point, we'll say $300, I'm happy to pay it. They may come back and say it's higher, and of course, I'll probably pay it regardless. But that, I just wanted to kind of give you a quick point. If you're watching this on YouTube and wondering what those super chats go to, this is a prime example. What you're looking at is my Twitter post that I made it public that I was requesting this database, and I'll keep you guys informed every step of the way, just like I did on that classified UAP report, which turned out to be pretty cool the way it turned out. By the way, the appeal is still going. Let's keep going.
We've also made progress in resolving the character of a limited number of UAP encounters. For example, let me show you a couple of another video and image taken years apart in different areas. In this video, U.S. Navy personnel recorded what appears to be triangles, some flashing, recorded several years ago, off the coast of the United States. This was recorded while the U.S. Navy ship observed a number of small unmanned aerial systems in the area. And importantly, the video was taken through night vision goggles with a single lens reflex camera. These remained unresolved for several years.
There's psychology behind letting this play, letting everybody see it, kind of get like a little ooh and ah. We've seen it in the media.
Several years later,
and
off a different coast, U.S. Navy personnel, again, in a swarm of unmanned aerial systems, and again through night vision goggles and an SLR camera, recorded this image. But this time, other U.S. Navy assets also observed unmanned aerial systems nearby. And we're now reasonably confident that these triangles correlate to unmanned aerial systems in the area. The triangular appearance is a result of light passing through the night vision goggles and then being recorded by an SLR camera. Now, I don't mean to suggest that everything that we observe is identifiable, but But this is a great example of how it takes considerable effort to understand what we're seeing in the examples that we are able to collect.
Considerable effort. Now, again, to bring up Mick West, he nailed this one pretty much from the get-go in the leak of the video by Jeremy Corbell. Now, I know a lot of people are attacking Jeremy Corbell for kind of talking about the pyramid UFOs and this and that. And I'll defend him on this point. Scott Bray just said under oath that they were unidentified, considered unidentified to them for a couple of years. It is quite possible that when Jeremy got them, he was under the impression that they were unidentified, and that's what he was being told. Scott Bray just put it into the testimony that it was unidentified for a couple of years, and it was not until they had let's say, corroborating evidence in addition to visual sightings of unmanned aerial systems or drones that they could say, oh, the combination of the night vision, the DSL, the LSR camera, that combination, the way the light passes through, the shape of the aperture of the lens, I mean, all that stuff is what Mick said. But in the same respect, right, when I'll defend that that was the stance that was just given, it always bothered me that when the government actually came out and said, yes, it was a real video, yes, it was being utilized by the UAP TF, but they wouldn't comment on what they designated the UFO, that bothered me. And it was because I thought that there was some other plan because they weren't doing anything about the leaks. So I thought, okay, if they're letting this stuff leak, there's got to be an issue here. But there wasn't, meaning they weren't concerned about it. They were quick like that to confirm that UAPTF was utilizing these videos, that they were real, authentic, they were shot by naval personnel, and yet they wouldn't tell me if they were considered unidentified. This is a tweet that I wrote in May of 2021. Let me see here, almost a little over a year ago, ironically, and almost to the day. Why is it the Pentagon seemingly doesn't care about the leaks? Will confirm the authenticity of the material, will confirm it's taken by Navy personnel, will confirm it's used by the UAPTF, but won't comment on their designation. In my honest opinion, shenanigans are afoot. Stay tuned. That was May of 2021. Fast forward almost a year to the day, and now we have a UFO congressional hearing, and all of that comes to light again, where these triangle UFOs are nothing more than an artifact of the camera and the way that it was shot. That they weren't triangles at all, but their best assessment was drone swarms. So for the last year plus, we have seen these videos in the media time and time again. They've created this intrigue behind UAP and the fascination by the general public that doesn't do this stuff every day like maybe you and I, but rather they're looking at this going, wow, pyramid, triangle shape, whatever they are, so cool, UFOs, night vision cameras, and it's been instilled for a year just to be blown out of the water. But the one that they do show that they say, oh, we have no idea what this is, right? And the public kind of seems like they're getting something cool. What happens? We get a video that has 3 frames of an object that likely is potentially just a balloon of some kind. I said likely, again, no hate mail, but regardless, it's nothing extraordinary based on the evidence that we have. So now the public completely can blow out of the water the stuff that they've seen for a year that has fascinated them. That turns out to be nothing. And the new stuff is shot on some cell phone in a cockpit that only captured 3 frames of an object that really isn't that mysterious looking or intriguing. All part of a plan? I don't know. Shenanigans? That's what I said last year. I stand by it.
And given the nature of our business, national defense, we've had to sometimes be less forthcoming with information in open forums than many would hope.
No kidding.
If UAP do indeed represent a potential threat to our security, then the capabilities, systems, processes, and sources we use to observe, record, study, or analyze these phenomena need to be classified at appropriate levels. We do not want potential adversaries to know exactly what we're able to see or understand, or how we come to the conclusions we make. Therefore, public disclosures must be carefully considered on a case-by-case basis.
Really? Let me add one thing there, Scott. What happened last year when I tried to get all of the UAP cases that were being utilized by the UAP Task Force, they were denied to me under grounds of national security. Each and every one. It was a blanket denial. There was no case-by-case basis at all. So based on what I knew then last year, I appealed, and I won the appeal. I told them, based on the final determination that I got, that all of those UAP cases that they denied in full across the board, however many they wanted to admit that they had at the time, which they didn't give me a number, but regardless, however many they had at the time, 100% denied in full for exemption B1, which was national security information. I appealed it, put up a case, and said, no, this is why you can't do that, and outlined all of the information that I could accumulate and won the appeal. It was remanded back to the Department of Navy, and they are being forced to review all of that information. So even though Scott here decided to tell Congress it's a case-by-case basis and they want to essentially be as open as possible, what he left out of that testimony is that was not the case, that they wanted to deny 100% of it. He comes from the U.S. Navy, and that was a U.S. Navy decision. And I guarantee, because he literally wrote the security classification guide, or excuse me, he literally approved the security classification guide that was written to give this enormous amount of secrecy surrounding UAP. He's the guy that approved it. What he just told Congress was definitely not the case from the beginning. It was sugar-coated just for his testimony.
What's next? We're concentrating on a seamless transition to the new organization. And future analysis of complicated issues of UAP issues will greatly benefit from the infrastructure, the process, and the procedures that we've developed to date. I'm confident that the task force, under Navy leadership, has forged a path forward that will allow us to anchor assessments in science and engineering vice anecdotal evidence. We remain committed to that goal, as I know the USDI organization does as well.
It didn't really sound too convincing there, Scott, at the end, but...
Quickly before I pass it to the ranking member and Chairman Schiff, I want to thank you both for taking the time, and I had a good time meeting with you last week, Director Moultrie, Undersecretary Moultrie. It's fair to say that you are a science fiction fan, is that correct?
It is fair to say that I am an inquisitive mind who has spent 40 years in the intelligence field and has focused on both science and science fiction. That is fair.
Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, look, my generation grew up looking at space sagas and the Apollo program. So all of us who grew up in the 60s were just thrilled by watching our first astronaut land on the moon. That was a momentous occasion. To people who were of different generations, some of them didn't believe that it happened. I still have relatives and friends who don't believe it happened, right? Science fiction to them. But to us, it was, no, that's the progress that we've made. And so I was enthralled by that, and I've taken that to heart. I enjoy the challenge of what may be out there. I have mentioned to you that, yes, I have followed science fiction. I have gone to conventions, even. I'll say it on the record. Got to break the ice somehow. But, I have done that, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. Don't necessarily dress up, but I do, I do believe that it's important to show that the Department of Defense has, we have character. And we're people just like you, just like the American people. We have our inquisitiveness. We have our questions. We want to know what's out there as much as you want to know what's out there. We get the questions not just from you, we get it from family members. And we get them night and day, not just in committee hearings. So finding what's out there is important, but first and foremost, it's important for us to do that so that we can ensure that our people, our personnel, our aviators, our bases and installations are safe. And then that curiosity factor is something else that we just want to know, because that's the human race. It's just, that insatiable desire to know.
What a question from left field, but this is what they were doing. And let me first say, I really was impressed by Ronald Moultrie. He's a very likable guy. He was very impressive. I know he didn't give us all the answers that we wanted. I would venture to guess maybe in the next 5+ years, after, depending upon how his career goes within DOD, I wouldn't be surprised if you see him come out of that kind of structure and go into politics because he has that very likable quality. I wish he didn't tell everyone that we're just like you, like all of you, because that is exactly what I think the intent was to humanize the Department of Defense, that there's this big, you want to talk about stigma, essentially the stigma about the big bad government people that are trying to cover up all the UFO stuff. To me, it was such a left field question, obviously planned. And although I love his answer, I think it's very cool. I wish he didn't have the comment part about, hey, we're just like everyone else, because to me that really shows what the intention was there. But rather he should have just left it at, hey, I'm a sci-fi geek. I love going to conventions. I'm inquisitive, this and that. I know a lot of people thought that was ridiculously silly and cheesy. I dug it. I didn't think it was a bad thing, but regardless, there's still psychology behind what these guys are doing up there. And that is creating this aura that they are just like everyone else. They're humanizing the effort. They're trying to tell everybody, they want to tell everyone else what's going on, but for national security on some of the stuff, hey, we need to. Sure, that's understandable. But it just seems like a lot of that really was acting, which is a shame.
Mr. Bright, can you rerun that first image that looked like it was outside of a plane window? And if you wouldn't mind going up to the screen and tell us what we're seeing. Not that you can necessarily tell us what we're seeing, but explain what we should be looking at in that first image.
Absolutely. And Alexi, what I'll ask is if you can
Poor Alexi.
stop it at
Her
certain
whole
points.
world's going to turn upside down right now. And Schiff has no idea what's going on. She's trying to pause the video where the UFO is. You can see on the screen there, they're using, I think this is called a VLC player, the VLC software, which is pretty old. And she's trying to stop it right in those 3 frames that captures the UFO. Quick. Missed it. And this goes on for minutes. I'm going to speed it up in the video, and I'll notate it where I'm speeding it up at 8 times.
And are we looking
the
outside of
speed.
a civilian aircraft window? Is that what we're looking at?
So if that didn't come through, you're looking outside a U.S. Navy F-18. I can verify that on the audio. I had to crank it way up. But you can see it just keeps going. That's 8 times
Is
speed.
that it right there? Can you point to the screen again what we're supposed to be looking at?
And Alexi's probably just sweating bullets right now trying. See, 8 times the speed.
Okay, if you could stop that frame.
Well, I think she's trying to
That's
there,
not
Adam. And still can't do it.
Alexi, just push play. Let's see if
Poor Alexi.
Here's what you'll see coming up.
There it is. There it goes.
There it went. Now back up just a
Think this was part of the plan?
spherical object right here. It zooms by the window.
Right where?
Right in this area right here.
And it's gone.
There we go.
There it went.
Could you see that part right there again going by? I think we're having a hard time stopping it in the right spot.
No kidding.
Okay.
So as you can see, it's difficult, and I think a part of the issue here is the laptop we're working with is not as easy for stopping that video in the right spot.
Yeah, poor Alexi. Makes you wonder, was that part of the plan? Let them see how difficult it was to work with 3 frames of a video? When she could have just went frame by frame with VLC, I think you can do that. But regardless, nobody thought ahead? These are the men and women that are likely investigating these UAP, that are analyzing the videos, that are collecting the data. And for a congressional UFO hearing, one that they knew was going to get a lot of attention, they couldn't figure out how to pause on those frames? How about just export the frames before you go into the hearing and show those? Who knows? Poor Alexi, though.
And is this a situation where it was observed by the pilot and it was also recorded by the aircraft's instruments?
We'll talk about the multi-sensor part in a later session. But in this case, we have at least that.
weird time for that audio to cut. Huh, Scott? It was, I think, one of the first times they said that they were going to push things to the classified session. And that's what they mean by closed hearing. So when you hear closed hearing, for those who aren't aware, that means that whatever they're encroaching on there when they're talking about certain information, that's the classified stuff, and they can't talk about it to you and I.
Last year's report also said that of those 144, 18 of them reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology, and some of them appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. That's pretty intriguing. And if you're able to answer this in this setting, are we aware of any foreign adversary capable of moving objects without any discernible means of propulsion?
I think I would, without discernible means of propulsion, I would say that we're not aware of any adversary that can move an object without discernible means of propulsion. The question then becomes, in many of these cases where we don't have a discernible mean of propulsion in the data that we have, in some cases there is likely sensor artifacts that may be hiding some of that. There's certainly some degree of something that looks like signature management that we have seen from some of these UAP, but I would caution. I would simply say that there are a number of events in which we do not have an explanation. And there are a small handful in which there are flight characteristics or signature management that we can't explain with the data that we have.
Part of that answer, I think, was written on the roof. But it's always fascinating to see people like Scott Bray, who you know is highly cleared to see probably quite a bit, try and answer some of these questions. And he just really has to choose his words carefully.
Finally, with respect to the second two videos showing the small triangles, the hypothesis is that those are commercial drones that, because of the use of night vision goggles, appear like triangles. Is that the operating assessment?
Some type of drone, some type of unmanned aerial system, and it is simply that light source resolves itself through the night vision goggles onto the SLR camera as a triangle.
And have we, in order to prove that hypothesis, flown a drone and observed it with that same technology to see whether we can reproduce the effect?
The UAP Task Force is aware of studies that have done that.
The UAP Task Force is aware of studies that have done that. It didn't say that the UAP Task Force has done that. Regardless, though, if you look at the work of Mick West, they did do some experimentation on essentially corroborating that theory. And I feel that they nailed it. And I think that the evidence in the video, if you look at the stars versus those craft with the blinking light, the stars are triangular as well. So it very much coincides. So I think that it's a proper debunk. But regardless, it goes back to that. Was this part of a master plan to really let the public get really super excited about something for a year, let those things leak out, and then just destroy them in this hearing? You know, because it's one thing when Mick West says it. It's another thing when under oath in a congressional hearing, they tell you the exact same thing. So I do find it interesting the way he phrased that final word, final phrase where he just said we're aware of studies, but they said that they didn't conduct it. Regardless, I feel on that particular case, the evidence checks out, but it really does play into that question mark of, was that part of the plan?
Are we capable, or have we made any breakthroughs, or anyone made any breakthroughs, to be able to cite something and make some determination at all of its composition, whether it's a solid or a gas? Is there any such capability?
From
not asking what, I'm just
right from some of the returns. I mean, it's clear that the majority. Well, it's clear that many of the observations we have are physical objects from the sensor data that we have.
gas is physical, is a physical object.
Watch
It
the
can
guy in
be,
the back.
And so, and you see where I'm going with this? I'm trying to determine what it is we're looking at, so if we can decide if something is a solid or a gas, and if there have been any conclusion on its capabilities, like its capabilities of movement, of turning, going, 180 degrees or 90-degree turn, anything along that line that we've been able to determine.
Within the, and again, I should point out that, that there is not a single explanation for UAP. There are a lot of different things that are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Basically, we really don't know much on that. That's all I'm trying to get at. And I'm pleased that you have protocol right now for our military, but are there any non-military reports coming forward of similar events, or is it all coming from military?
The UAP Task Force has a very good working relationship with the FAA. They have very good working relationship with other parts of the U.S. government so that we can ingest reports from
Do we have
from
any
those sources.
reports non-military?
Yes.
Thank you. That's my question. And do we need to put out protocol for civilians that may be in that arena, like through FAA? Do you think that would be appropriate and helpful?
I think standardized reporting, without a doubt, is key to helping us get to ascertain what some of these are.
I think it would be important as well. There are other people besides the U.S. that have had these experiences and reported them. Is that correct?
There are. That's correct.
Is it all of our allies, or is it allies and adversaries? What have we learned publicly?
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Well, that goes to my next question. Publicly, have others made anything which would not have to be considered closed? I don't want you to answer what they've said necessarily.
Allies have seen these. China has established its own version of a UAP task force, so clearly a number of countries have observations of things in the airspace that they can't identify.
And do we share data with some, with all? Are they sharing with us?
We share data with some, and some share data with us.
But not necessarily all that have publicly reported something?
That's correct.
Guy in the back.
And I think that's an important thing, and for the other session, actually, that we don't discuss that now.
Tell me you didn't prepare for the hearing by not telling me you didn't prepare for the hearing. I just get a kick out of the guy in the back wondering what in the world the guy in front of him is asking about. I laughed throughout that testimony, but there was some important bits in there, especially about other countries sharing data with us. China having a UAP task force. I know that was reported, I believe, through the debrief a little while back. But again, just kind of solidifying that as fact. All of that, was interesting nonetheless. I just love the fact that gas got brought up again and that whole mess. It's just very reminiscent of swamp gas from the 1950s trying to explain UFOs. And Bray, God bless him, how do you answer that when you're clearly not talking about a gas, but a congressman is trying to connect it as such? Who knows?
I think, Mr. Bray, you said something that I want to unpack a little bit. A number of these UAPs, you said, we can't explain. Again, in the service of sort of reducing speculation and conspiracy theories, we can't explain can range from a visual observation that was distant on a foggy night, we don't know what it is, to we've found an organic material that we can't identify, right? Those are radically different worlds. So when you say we can't explain, give the public a little bit better sense of where on that spectrum of we can't explain we are. Are we holding materials, organic or inorganic, that we don't know about? Are we, picking up emanations that are something other than light or infrared that could be deemed to be communications? Give us a sense for what you mean when you say we can't explain.
Sure. When I say we can't explain, I mean exactly as you described there, that there is a lot of information, like the video that we showed, in which there's simply too little data to create a reasonable explanation. There are a small handful of cases in which we have more data that our analysis simply hasn't been able to fully pull together a picture of what happened. And those are the cases where we talk about where we see some indications of flight characteristics or signature management that are not what we had expected. When it comes to material that we have no material. We have detected no emanations within the UAP Task Force that would suggest it's anything non-terrestrial in origin. So there's when I say unexplained, I mean everything from too little data to the data that we have doesn't point us towards an explanation, but we'll go wherever the data takes us. Again, we've made no assumptions about what this is or isn't. We're committed to understanding these, and so we'll go wherever that data takes us.
Somehow I don't believe that, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt there, Scott.
Mr. Moultrie, as the chairman mentioned, DoD had an initiative to study UFOs in the 1960s called Project Blue Book. It's also been well reported in our briefing and in other places that we have more recent projects, specifically ATIP. Could you describe any other initiatives that the DoD or DoD contractors have managed after Project Blue Book ended and prior to ATIP beginning? Did anything also predate Project Blue Book?
So I can't speak to what may have predated Project Blue Book. I mean, of course, there's Roswell and all these other things that people have talked about over the years. I'm familiar with Blue Book. I'm familiar with ATIP. I haven't seen other documented studies that have been done by DoD in that regard.
So you're not aware of anything in between Project Blue Book and ATIP?
I'm not aware of anything that's official that was done in between those two. Okay. Hasn't been brought to my attention.
Okay, so let me unpack two things. I'll deal with we'll get to the official versus unofficial, but unpack the study in between, let's call it ATIP, the time frame, and Project Blue Book. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, the U.S. Air Force had on their manuals how to report UFOs. They were being sent to the NORAD installation. Generally, you don't create manuals like that for nothing. I discovered this back in, I believe it was 2000, talked about it for quite a few years. When the media was going to highlight it, it literally disappeared. It's a much longer story, but that's the nutshell. But it literally was rewritten 48 hours after the Huffington Post and journalist Lee Spiegel was profiling the Black Vault and some of the top documents that I had given him. That was one of them. Specifically, it was Air Force Manual 10-206. And it outlined in Chapter 5 all about UFOs and what to report and gave specific details on what the report needed, and then they sent it to NORAD. Whether or not that was attached to an official program or not, in my opinion, there was probably more than one or two reports over the years that was on the books by pilots. But the NORAD installation told me they had nothing. Canadian government gave me a pile of service reports that essentially tied into NORAD and the collection of this type of data. So I wanted to bring that up because there is clearly an effort of some kind, or at least there was, between what we consider ATIP and that time frame versus Blue Book. Now, I want to spend a minute or two based on, I know a lot of things thrown my direction about ATIP and its connection to being a UFO program, and whether it was or wasn't, or whether it was a nickname or not, or whether it was real or not, or whether it was UFO related or not, all of that mess. And to be honest with you, I don't, from this hearing anyway, but with that question, think that we can really take a lot to the bank and go, aha, it's settled with ATIP. And I know that some of my haters out there are going to, clip this segment out and go Greenwald's and fill in the expletive because I'm saying this. But when you look at the question and you look at the media, and he admitted in a podcast he did about 5, I think his quote was like 5 hours of research for this hearing. And kudos to him. It doesn't sound like a lot, but, he really looked into it. And let's face it, ATIP was a program according to the internet and all of the media articles out there. So no matter what the truth is, right? Like, take my personal finding out, take your personal finding out. If you are a newcomer and you go to the internet and you spend a few hours and you look, That was a documented time frame of UFO, quote unquote, UFO research. Yes, I'm saying quote unquote because that is what the stories were. And that was a point, like a time point that he could reference. Moultrie saying that he was familiar with ATIP. That's great. That's fascinating. But it doesn't really take away from the fact that it was either official or unofficial. In addition, let's say the DoD changes their stance tomorrow on ATIP and that it was some UFO research effort led by Luis Elizondo. I'll report it to you. I'll bring it to you. I'll put it on this channel. I'll put it on my website. I don't hide from the facts. It doesn't bother me at all. But as it stands right now, their stance is it wasn't a UFO program. It all stemmed back to the OSAP program and wasn't paranormal or UFO related at all. That's what the official line is. Don't kill me for delivering it, but rather that is what the DoD's stance is. What I think what we're getting into from what I've kind of learned and seen and heard over and over, and you dissect every syllable and character that is used by the Department of Defense and Pentagon spokespeople and FOIA people. After researching this for so many years, here's what I think that this is really ultimately ending up in. And I know others have echoed very similar things as well. Is that my guess is this wasn't an official effort sponsored by, the Department of Defense to go out and look for UFOs like the media led us to believe. I've said that for years now. I truly think that that's where this is going. Luis Elizondo, I believe, probably heard about what was going on, probably saw the importance of UAP, the security issue behind them, the question mark, and to his credit, and I would fully support this, took that under his wing to kind of pursue. And I think what's going to come out in the next year, maybe 2-3 years, is that this was just a small group at this time of people that were not working on any official program whatsoever. I believe you'll see the term friends of the program come up, that they essentially were people that had very similar beliefs to Luis Elizondo. I know Brian Bender from Politico has referred to it as a portfolio. I think that's probably overstating it. Where are the reports? It's these age-old questions like, where is everything? So I think that that's where we're going to end up, okay? And I wanted to at least put that in this part of the hearing, because now let me go back to Moultrie. Is this the setting for him to get into the weeds and the dirt and it wasn't a program really, an ATIP this, or this guy did that, or it was all off the books? Nobody really cares about that in this particular setting. They just don't. So Moultrie's just going to take the congressman's question, that is the time frame that he's talking about, that is the effort that he's talking about, that clearly the DoD has heard more than enough about, and not get into the weeds of arguing what was or wasn't official, or a portfolio versus a program, or a hobby, or a lie even. He's just going to answer the question. So again, my haters out there, they're going to hate this section, but I think that that's what we're going to come down to. And I give Mr. Elizondo credit, despite the drama that's going on right now. Give him credit for taking that topic seriously. I just wish when he exited the shadows, so to speak, that we heard that if and I'm 98% sure that that's how that this is going to play out, that he did do work within the Pentagon, but it wasn't like nobody really cared, that as long as it didn't affect his other duties, that he had his job. And if he did this other effort to try and help out or do some extra stuff, that, the bosses that did know, because apparently a lot of people were left in the dark, they say, yeah, go, as long as it doesn't interfere with your other duties, you go right ahead. And that's what this is. So I give him credit for that. I just wish we heard that from the beginning. But regardless, that going back to Moultrie, I think that's the ATIP reference. This was not the setting to get into that. And to be honest with you, the congressman just doesn't care either. He's just interested in what he's asking about, not the nitty-gritty details.
So just to confirm, you're not aware of any technology or engineering resources that have been focused on these efforts besides what we've mentioned today?
Once again, I'll say no contractual or programmatic efforts that are involved. The reason why I qualify it that way, let me qualify it that way. I can't speak to what people may be looking at in the department. Somebody says, I'm looking at something that may be unidentified, and I can't speak to that. I speak to official programs that we have on the record.
And I think that solidifies it a bit in a nonchalant way, that he can't really speak to those that were kind of doing this on their own free time, that they became aware of a pilot's video or a photograph or a story, that they're sitting there and doing this on either their own free time or their extra time that, although it was considered DoD work, was nothing official. So I think he recognizes that is something that he can't speak to because he's not mandating it. Him as the head of OUSDINS and whomever that works alongside him is not saying, you investigate this, let's go, here's the manual, here's the program name, I need a report by 5. That's not necessarily what this was. And I think what he's essentially alluding to there is there likely were people, whether it be Mr. Elizondo or other people within the Navy or ONI or wherever they were doing this. That is not to diminish their work, but rather putting it and framing it in a proper context. And that's always what I've been interested in more than all.
It's also been reported that there have been UAP observed and interacting with and flying over sensitive military facilities, particularly, and not just ranges, but some facilities housing our strategic nuclear forces. One such incident allegedly occurred at Malmstrom Air Force Base, in which 10 of our nuclear ICBMs were rendered inoperable. At the same time, a glowing red orb was observed overhead. I'm not commenting on the accuracy of this. I'm simply asking you whether you're aware of it and whether you have any comment on the accuracy of that report.
Let me pass that to Mr. Bray. If you've been looking at UAPs over the last 3 years.
That data is not within the holdings of the UAP Task Force.
Okay, but are you aware of the report, or that the data exists somewhere?
I have heard stories. I have not seen the official data on that.
So you've just seen informal stories, no official assessment that you've done or exists within DoD that you're aware of regarding the Malmstrom incident?
All I can speak to is what's within my cognizance of the UAP Task Force, and we have not looked at that incident.
Well, I would say, it's a pretty high-profile incident. I don't claim to be an expert on this, but that's out there in the ether. You're the guys investigating it. I mean, who else is doing it?
If something was officially brought to our attention, we would look at it. There are many things that are out there in the ether that aren't officially brought to our attention.
So how would it have to be officially brought to your attention? I'm bringing it to your attention.
Sure,
this is pretty official.
Sure. So we'll go back and take a look at it, but generally there is some authoritative figure that says there is an incident that occurred. We'd like you to look at this. But in terms of just tracking what may be in the media that says that something occurred at this time at this place, there are probably a lot of leads that we would have to follow up on. I don't think we are resourced to do that right now.
Well, I don't claim to be an authoritative figure, but for what it's worth, I would like you to look into it. And
sure.
If for no other reason, you could dismiss it and say this is not worth wasting resources on.
This is one of those sections that I'll defend Moultrie and Bray here. And the reason is because what was not asked by the senator, or excuse me, by the congressman was, or what was not in his question, I should say, was the time frame of the incident. And we're going back more than 50 years. Now, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't look at it, but there's only a select few people that you're going to speak with, right? I mean, let's talk about this from an investigative standpoint. There's only a select few people that you can likely speak with, Robert Salas being the top one. And that's great. I like Robert. I think he should have his story told. But what resources could the UAP Task Force or AIMSOG devote to that? Because on paper, whether you agree with it or not, or whether I agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. On paper, they already investigated the incident more than 50 years ago. And they determined what they did. And that was that it was a malfunction with the silos and them flicking off. I've got the official declassified histories from the Air Force. Now, again, I'm not saying I believe it, but I'm saying on paper to somebody like Bray and Moultrie, why would they go back 50 years to what? Reopen it? Like, where is that data? What is that data? You've got Robert Salas's testimony. That's great. Nothing's taken away from that. But if they hear that and they're sitting there and are taking notes, what are they going to do after? There's not much that they can do on that particular case. So I think that number one, it's 50 plus years ago, we've got to understand that these guys are not going to turn into instant ufologists, nor should they. I mean, for them to run around and do 50, 60-year-old cases would be essentially away from the mission here. And I think that their aim is to figure out more of a present day. And when you think that the Nimitz was almost 20 years ago, that's how long ago, 20 years ago was the Nimitz encounter, and that's relatively recent. To go back more than 2 times that time frame, that's difficult to do. I wish Gallagher put a timestamp on it, because I think Moultrie and Bray may have had a better answer, just because they seem like very educated guys and they can think on their feet. And they probably would have said something like that, where although we've taken in cases maybe into our database, what are you going to do? When you have an F-18 pilot with a cell phone camera video and data from the sensors on board that may be classified, but they have access to all of that. When you have that case sitting here, and then you have one that's over 50 years old that's already been investigated on paper, the data is shoddy at best, meaning it's old. And the data, like what data is there other than the testimony? That is valuable, but what can you do with that? They're going to go here. They're going to go with that F-18 encounter. And look, let's face it, they should. So I'll defend them on that one. I think that they of course, I want them to know. They didn't know. It's not surprising.
And then finally, are you aware of a document that appeared around 2019, sometimes called the Admiral Wilson memo or EW Notes memo?
I am not.
You're not.
Are you trying?
I'm not personally aware of that.
Okay. This is a document in which, again, I'm not commenting on the veracity. I was hoping you would help me with that, in which a former head of DIA claims to have had a conversation with the Dr. Eric Wilson and claims to have sort of been made aware of certain contractors or DoD programs that he tried to get fuller access to and was denied access to. So you're not aware of that?
I'm not aware, Congressman.
In my 10 seconds remaining, then, I guess I just would ask, Mr. Chairman, unanimous consent to enter that memo into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
I'm wondering how many actually knew what Gallagher was submitting into the record at that moment. Let's just kind of break this down. First off, the Eric W. Davis notes, the Davis Wilson notes, whatever you want to refer to him as, got entered in the congressional record. What exactly does that mean? Well, I tried to find an official answer, like what exactly does that mean? It really doesn't mean much of anything. I don't have an official answer for you. Is it big? Of course it is. It's interesting to see a congressman pull up something, albeit I think it's a hoax. And there's, for those of you who aren't aware, I've got extensive videos on this channel that dive deep into the background of the documents and prove beyond any shadow of a doubt, in my mind, that the beginning part of the story that set Admiral Wilson off to find these secret programs was a fake. And no one analyzed the document, but they all had it as part of their story. So the biggest advocates that this is a true, real record has always had that document as part of the overall story, this quote unquote NRO document. And so once I finally just gave in a year and a half ago or whatever it was to just look into these things, because I kept getting asked and I didn't want to touch it because it just screamed hoax to me. But I just I'm like, what, what am I going to figure out on them? So I did. I mean, I did go in. I didn't expect to find anything, but rather analyze the document. I think it's a provable hoax. In my opinion, that takes off the whole beginning part of the story, and the rest of the narrative falls apart naturally, although parts of it sound very cool and intriguing and have some real elements to it. Just don't think it's there. So when I saw this in the congressman's question, I told Politico this yesterday, which was printed in their article on it. It was a facepalm moment. Like, oh my God, why would you take time referencing this? Because to me, it harms the conversation. If more evidence comes to light to me, and then me personally, I would change my view. Great. I have no problem admitting that I would change my view. But the only evidence that people can cite to say that I'm wrong are from anonymous sources they can't tell me about. So that's silliness, right? I mean, I can't do anything with that. So my best assessment on that, if that's worth anything, is that it's a hoax. So seeing it, facepalm. But now that it's done and over, and now that I see Gallagher's post-hearing explanation, which was given to Politico, and I wish I knew that before I gave statements to Politico. They didn't do anything wrong, mind you. I just was not aware of Gallagher's intent. And he was saying, essentially, he's submitting it for the record to either solidify its truth or to just destroy it and move on. I'm paraphrasing there. But essentially, like, if there's something to this, great. If not, let's move on. Let's move on to something else. Let's put it to bed. And I think, you know what, after hearing that, I would have not recommended that, but it's done and over with. So you know what? Fine. If they want to take it seriously, then let's get Eric Davis and Thomas Wilson, who's already denied that this happened. He says it's bunk. He's already went on the record like that, and Eric Davis skirts around giving official statements on it and can't comment and all that. Put those two in a chair and put them under oath. I 150% agree with that, support it. Now that this is all said and done and Congress has interest, cool, let's do it. And I would almost bet, I'll bet $1. I'll bet $1 that at least one of them, their stories will fall apart. I don't think that this will go anywhere. I will be surprised, but I want to be proven wrong, because the validity behind these documents would change the world, right? We all know that. Crashed alien wreckage and MJ-12 references and all that stuff. That's fine with me. Let's get it on the record, put those guys under oath. So now it's not a podcast, right, where somebody asks Eric Davis and he goes, oh, I can't comment on that, which are silly answers. I mean, some people read into that so much. It's not surprising that he answers it that way, but I think he likes the mystique behind all of this. But that's a different show and different conversation. Regardless, let's get him under oath. I fully support that. Let's do it. Settle this once and for all. And if I'm wrong, I will gladly accept that. Why people think that I would fight it is wrong. If I am proven wrong on this, humanity changes. Why would I not accept that, right? If it comes out that there's some crashed alien wreckage and MJ-12's real or whatever other thing in the notes was, I forget. I mean, I don't even care about him anymore. But it was a lot of wild claims. If all that turns out to be true and humanity changes, do you think John Greenwald's really going to fight and say, no, the documents are fake? No, because the world changes. Why people put that argument against me is so utterly ridiculous. But show me the proof. Put Wilson and Davis under oath, and if they say that it's all true, great. Let's pave the way to figuring out where the wreckage is, show the bodies, so to speak, figuratively speaking, and let's go from there. Until then, it's silliness.
First question is, there have been no collisions between any U.S. assets in one of these UAPs, correct?
We have not had a collision. We've had at least 11 near misses, though.
11 near misses. I kind of raised my eyebrows at that point, and then I realized, oh, wait, that was in the public report. Also, this is the screenshot from the classified version, also echoed the same. The UAPTF has 11 reports of documented instances in which pilots reported near misses with UAP. Now, they're echoing exactly what was in last year in June's report. Does that mean nothing else has happened since then? I mean, have they done anything? Maybe near misses just really aren't that common, so maybe that's explainable. But some of the other statistics that he rattled off also echoes the June report. So has literally nothing changed. The only change that I can reference, we already went over, which was the database of 400 sightings. But we also don't know if 400 sightings existed last year also, and they only chose 144 because, according to the report, they had the most supporting data to them. Multiple sensor observations, more reliable information. So we don't know if that number is the same also, at least as far as I'm aware. So not sure how much has really changed, but kind of eager to see some updated numbers here as AIMSOG gets underway. Maybe
we'll talk about those 11 near misses or any place where there's close proximity. I assume, or tell me if I'm wrong, there's been no attempt, there's no communications or any kind of communication signals that emanate from those objects that we've detected, correct?
That's correct.
And have we attempted to communicate with those objects?
No.
So we don't even put out a alert saying, U.S. Identify yourself. You are, within our flight path or something like that. We haven't said anything like that.
We've not put anything out like that. Generally speaking, for example, in the video that we showed earlier, it appears to be something that is, unmanned, appears to be something that may or may not be in controlled flight, and so we've not attempted any communication with that.
You can't identify them, but you just assume that they're unmanned. But wait a minute, Scott, you told me that you were following the data and didn't make any assumptions. What a fantastic question. I'll be honest with you, I've never really thought about the obvious, like, hey, why don't you do a hail and see would they respond, or some kind of, hey, identify yourself. Such a simplistic answer, but I'll admit it, I've never really thought of it. So kudos to the congressman on that one, because it's something that we don't really talk about. We talk about capabilities and we talk about, could it be this or could it be that? Why haven't we just tried to talk to them? And I thought that was just a fascinating question that maybe a lot of you have all thought about for whatever stupid reason. I haven't. And then again, his answer was somewhere on the ceiling. But regardless, well done. I thought that was very cool.
How about wreckage? Have we come across any wreckage of any kind of object that has now been examined by you?
The UAP Task Force doesn't have any wreckage that isn't explainable, that isn't consistent with being of terrestrial origin.
Well, that's neato, because now we can solidify that there is wreckage, even though he kind of dismisses it, saying, well, it's terrestrial in origin. So obviously they're out there, they're collecting things. This is where I hope the next generation UAP Task Force, the AOI MSG or AIMSOG, they said the name's going to change, thank God, because I don't want to keep saying AIMSOG in future videos. But there is a documented history that not many people really talk about this day and age, of pieces of, in this particular case, flying saucers that have been recovered from either crashes or something that fell off of an unknown craft or whatever. And these are documented in classified files within, namely, the CIA, also the Defense Intelligence Agency through Project Moondust references. That also has been done. And although a lot of that could be like fallen satellite debris and stuff like that, I've made discoveries in the past through FOIA of not only this debris, but not only the realization that they don't really have an explanation, at least with what they've released. But on top of that, they seemingly, especially the CIA, keeps losing these files. So when you try and get them to go back and say, okay, guys, this was from 1950, whatever, or even 40, whatever, and it has redactions, time to kind of re-review this. We've passed quite a bit of time here, likely not classified anymore. And then, whoops, they lost the document. And that has happened on more than one occasion. And in a couple of occasions has dealt with references to physical objects or debris that has been connected to UFOs, or like what you're seeing on the screen, flying saucers from Denmark. This is actually a very kind of fun story that ties into a later UFO case where they found a very similar looking piece after having their own UFO sighting. But these documents were classified when the guy actually had his encounter and didn't realize that there was a case in the 1940s, I think it was, and a very similar object as well. So very cool correlation there. I've done a little bit of writing on it, so I'll link it in the show notes below, but definitely take a look at it because there's all sorts of cool stuff to find.
Do we have any sensors underwater to detect on submerged UAPs? anything that is in the ocean or in the seas.
So I think that would be more appropriately addressed in closed session, sir.
Okay.
Okay. So we shot that down. Remember in the video, for those of you who have watched it, of my preliminary thoughts prior to the hearing, and I said you probably will hear a lot of that referencing to the closed session or the classified session, that we can't talk about that. This was yet another instance. And also kudos to this congressman for asking about underwater objects, unidentified submersible objects or submerged objects, USOs as they call them, or refer to the acronym. So in a hearing on UAP, I bet you some of the other congressmen that heard that question like, is that really an issue? Are we really? And they're writing notes and stuff, because that was a great question. So obviously, some of these are probably fed through their staff and stuff that maybe asked some of their constituents for answers, or people wrote in and said, hey, you got to ask about this. It doesn't matter how those questions came in. Kudos for the congressman that asked those types of great questions. And then, by the way, the Pentagon press secretary, John Kirby, he had addressed it later that day. And by address it, I mean would not touch it. That video and that exchange from the journalist Jeff Schogel from Task and Purpose, and kudos to Jeff, a member of the media, asked some great questions over the last year or two on UAP, is not afraid to jump in there. But he's the one that also wanted John Kirby to expand on the USO topic, and Kirby just quickly shot it down. He's like, nah, I ain't touching that. They want it in a closed session, so there it's going to stay. So check out that video. That's also on the channel. I posted that in the last couple of days.
So basically, it sounds like we have a good partnership with FAA. But apart from FAA, we don't have partnerships with other agencies or other entities that might be tracking, so that we could enlarge our data set to make comparisons.
So we will. So that's the goal of this next
will.
effort, will be to expand that relationship with the rest of government and the interagency, so we can understand what they're seeing, what we're seeing. We can correlate on each other's holdings,
Because
and
I
hopefully
think,
resolve this.
sorry to interrupt, but I think that we might have a bias right now going on with regard to just reporting on UAPs being in training areas when we don't really track what's happening elsewhere.
Now, this is one thing that I want to bring up, and again, my haters out there will clip it and say that I'm talking trash again about Luis Elizondo, and that's not the intent with this, but we do have to look at this logically. He just said Moultrie just said we will have relationships with other agencies to essentially share data, understand UAP, investigate, but whatever it is. Why, in an effort that allegedly took place over the course of a decade, were those relationships not solidified? And that, to me, again, plays into that very minuscule effort, not to diminish results if they got results, okay? But just framing it in proper context. If you do something for almost 10 years, because he says there's contradicting dates, but let's just call it 2008, he goes into OSAP. There's some weird stuff about him saying he never had anything to do with OSAP, but later did, and that came out in Stephen Greenstreet's video. I just interviewed Stephen Greenstreet, but let's just call it 2008. Takes over the program in, again, contradicting dates. Some say 2009, some say 2010, all the way to his resignation in 2017. In that entire effort, he was never able to solidify any relationships. And that's where, I think that the data is starting to support that this was that small effort based on a couple people that knew there was a problem. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I want to stress that. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just trying to frame this properly. Why didn't they have any of those relationships set up? And I hope that comes out. I really do, because if there were relationships, then go back and exploit those. If there were, let's say, sharing of data protocols and stuff like that, where is that data? And take the next step. But if none of that happened, then we have to start asking some of those logical questions that need answers. And I think a lot of things are still unanswered.
Last question. Have our encounters with UAPs altered the development of either our offensive or defensive capabilities, or even our sensor capabilities?
We'd save that for the closed session.
Okay.
So more of that classified stuff on whether UAP has played a role in altering the way that we essentially operate, censor or otherwise?
Obviously, this topic of UAPs has attracted a lot of interest in people that are curious about this hearing today. As we talk about, and I would say there's a lot of what I would call amateur interest groups that are involved in the UAP field. My question is, when there are unsubstantiated claims or manufactured claims of UAPs or kind of false information that's put out there, what are the consequences for people that are involved with that or groups that are involved with that?
So one of the concerns that we have is that there are a lot of individuals and groups that are putting information out there that could be considered to be somewhat self-serving. We're trying to do what's in the best interest of, one, the Department of Defense, and then two, what's in the best interest of the public, to ensure that we can put factual-based information back into the mainstream and back into the bloodstream of the reporting media that we have, so people understand what's there. It's important because we are attempting, as this hearing has drawn out, to understand, one, what may just be natural phenomenon, two, what may be sensor phenomenology or things that were happening with sensors, three, what may be legitimate counterintelligence threats to places that we have or bases or installations, or security threats to our platforms. And anything that diverts us off of what we have with the resources that have been allocated to us, send us off in these spurious chases and hunts that are just not helpful. And they also they also contribute to the undermining of the confidence that the Congress and the American people have that we are trying to get to the root cause of what's happening here, report on that, and then feed that back into our national security apparatus so we are able to protect the American people and our allies. So it is harmful, it is hurtful, but hopefully if we get more information out there, we'll start to lessen the impact of some of those spurious reports.
So just taking that a step further, that misinformation, false narratives, manufactured, so what are the consequences? Are there legal consequences? Are there examples that you can give us where people have been held accountable by this misinformation or disinformation?
I can't give you, any examples where somebody's been legally held liable for putting something out there, but...
Well, I guess what's the deterrent from people engaging in this activity?
I don't know. I don't have that answer. That's something that, welcome the dialogue with Congress to talk about that with the members who, help legislate those laws to say what should be the legal ramifications that we could use to potentially hold individuals accountable, whether it be citizens or information that might be injected into our media by other forces or other countries, if you will.
It was a fascinating exchange about misinformation and disinformation. And let me just say before I get into the comments on this section that I believe it should go both ways. That I believe that if the Department of Defense or the government as a whole, the CIA, the NSA, whomever it is, gives out maliciously false information about UFOs, that there should be consequences. There should be repercussions. But that wasn't the root of the congressman's question. Rather, he was on the other side, the public side, of people that were giving away disinformation, misinformation, false information about UAP. And I'm really intrigued by that because I want to know the root of what he is talking about. Are you talking about somebody who is making up a claim that they saw a UFO, so they call the government and they say, you have to investigate this, and let's just say they fly out and do an investigation and realize that they were making it up? I mean, how would you prove any type of criminal negligence on wasting the government's time? I mean, maybe they drank too much, maybe they took hallucinogenic of some kind, or maybe they just really did see something, but they have no evidence to back it up. How would you ever prove that and then hold them criminally negligent or have a consequence from a legal sense for that? So my question then in my own mind leaned towards, are you talking about people that are making certain claims against the government and making certain claims that they, let's say, have knowledge of something that they can't confirm to you exactly what, but lead you to believe that they know more than they'll give you, based on maybe past employment or something like that. That then creates an issue for the government in the sense that you're creating and cultivating a distrust in a department that may be unfounded. That, I'm not a lawyer, but that sounds like more of what LaHood was potentially talking about, where now you're cultivating something that may or may not be true, but creating an issue for the Department of Defense that now they have to allocate resources to combat. That if the allegation is made against them of some major malicious intent when it comes to informing the public that may or may not be grounded. But if that is considered false, could there be criminal negligence on something like that? That I found a fascinating possibility. And if I had the opportunity, I would love to ask the congressman what the root of that question was. When you listen to Moultrie's response, I believe they were on two different pages, meaning like I think Moultrie kind of interpreted it one way and LaHood meant it another way, and they just kind of ended up going this direction in the conversation. And I don't think they quite clicked. At least that was my impression. But Moultrie did make reference to that type of misinformation or disinformation being, I think he said, self-serving or something to that effect. So essentially, putting out that information and benefiting from it. And again, fascinating exchange that I think maybe some people just kind of tuned out on. And I don't blame you. These hearings are really awful sometimes. But regardless, I think it was a fascinating exchange because congressmen don't utilize their 5 minutes just to utilize them, generally speaking. I mean, they have roots to why they are asking these questions. Sometimes it's just to get certain angles on the record. If you watch enough of these hearings, and I am one of those geeks that loves to watch them, even on non-UFO related topics, you see them utilize their 5 minutes, not necessarily to ask any questions, but to sometimes just chastise the person that's in the chair. It becomes very political. You see a lot of fireworks sometimes in these hearings, so that they are fascinating to watch. But when they ask questions, they generally have them rooted in something. So I would love to ask the congressman one day, if I ever had the opportunity, what that was. Last point on this before we move on is it was actually kind of funny. I only name names when I talk about people when I have to, and I'm not gonna try and embarrass anybody here. But there's a very popular YouTube channel out there that I'm guessing maybe some of you watch. But regardless, who was so upset that this exchange took place, and how could they, potentially have this conversation and squash people? I'm paraphrasing, but squash people coming forward with stories and this and that. And it always makes you kind of scratch your head that if there's talk about people trying to decrease the amount of misinformation or disinformation out there, and people fight that or think that's a bad thing, it makes you kind of wonder, doesn't it? Like, why wouldn't you want less mis or disinformation out there? And again, I preface this whole kind of sidebar with, I think that it should apply to the government as well, equally. So if there is malicious intent from either side with mis or disinformation, then there should be consequences. Again, both sides. But why would people be afraid of that? They wouldn't circumvent the First Amendment. So I think that if somebody came out and said, I saw this UFO and this is what it was, they're not going to say, go get him. He didn't really see that. That's not what that was about. That's not how I took that. So they're not going to encroach on a constitutional right. So why the upset tone on the talk of diminishing, decreasing, or trying to get rid of misinformation? Boggles my mind, but it really does make you think, because I welcome it. Anything I put out there when it comes to saying the government has done this or has done that, I have information to back that up in the form of evidence I'll give you. I don't do anonymous sources, as many of you know. Or I should say that I don't hinge what I tell you on anonymous sources. Rather, I produce evidence. So if I say the government was not truthful with this, I can prove that. So they're not going to come after me. I don't care. And if they do, great. Let's go under oath. I would love that opportunity. So, that kind of talk is silly. So to be upset at that, man, should make us all think.
Briefing, and without going into the details of what kinds of secrets that we can't share here, what is it? What are we protecting? I don't know if you can answer this question in this open forum, but in fact, your perception of what it is we have to, quote, protect.
So I think right now what's really important for us to protect is how we know certain things. So there are a lot of things that we know, whether it be about the thinking of other leaders around the world, the weapon systems that are being developed, or how we detect things that may be threats to us. Many of those things are the result of some of our most sensitive sources and methods. And we'll use those things not just for this effort, but those same sources and methods are used to help protect us from adversaries and from others who might mean to do us harm. There aren't separate UAP sensors. There's not a separate UAP processing computer. There's not a separate UAP dissemination chain or whatever. So it's the same process. It's the same system that we have that helps us do all that.
Sources and methods. For those who aren't aware, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, there were multiple court cases that were brought up to fight UFO secrecy, namely by the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, or CAUSE. I actually wrote them about some of the documents in my book here, shameless plug, but I wrote a book called Inside the Black Vault, and I break down some of the documentation that was fought for back then and what came out years and years later. So the judge actually agreed with the government, namely the NSA in one particular case, that all of this information should be withheld. But the excuse was primarily sources and methods, and that was what they kept referring to. Sources and methods, sources and methods. So we can't tell you because of sources and methods. So it's interesting here that now, approximately 40 plus years from those court cases, that we're hearing the exact same excuse, that it's sources and methods. Now, here's where I wrestle, because keep in mind, I don't only do UFO requests or UFO information. In fact, I don't have an exact percentage, but UFOs probably encompass about 10% of my entire archive of more than 3 million pages. And in fact, it's probably not even that high. But that being said, I deal with quite a bit. And I do support some level of secrecy, including sources and methods, that there are certain things that we shouldn't hear about. But when it comes to UFOs, that has seemingly been the fallback for many, many decades. And is it warranted? Because we have seen these full denials of documents and cases and information, and they say, no, we can't give you sources and methods. So again, I wanted to give you that historical tidbit that none of that is new, that is from the playbook back from legal court cases that were fought 40-ish years ago by Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, and it was sources and methods that ultimately convinced the judge in a top secret in-camera affidavit that was given to the judge. It convinced them, no, we can't release those documents. So a little bit of history there for you, but something I wanted to stress, that what you are hearing is something that has been fallen back on now for decades.
Gentlemen, beyond videos, is there a range of other information that the executive branch has that would be valuable to the American people while protecting sources and methods, obviously? The details of individual encounters, including the time, place, and details of an encounter. And does the AIMSOG have a clear and repeatable process for considering public release as part of the process?
Chairman Carson,
and do you commit to building that process if it's not in place?
The UAP Task Force, the security classification guide that the UAP Task Force has been operating under, that I approved, really was meant to protect those sources and methods, and meant to protect any knowledge that an adversary intelligence entity may gain from understanding what we're tracking, how we track it, or when we're tracking it, or if we're not. And so that has been an important piece in the balance between transparency and preserving our warfighting advantage, because the U.S. military does train as it would fight. What I will commit to is, at least for that material that's under my authority as the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, for information that we have, when it does not involve sources and methods, and when we can, with a reasonable degree of confidence, determine that it does not pose a foreign intelligence or national security threat, and it's within my authority to do so, I commit to declassifying that. So I believe very much in the transparency of this, and we work very hard to balance that with our national security needs.
Well, we're about to find out whether or not Scott really does support such transparency, because here's why. Here's a page from that security classification guide that I've talked about in the precursor video, kind of my, again, forethoughts before the hearing took place. I put that on Twitter as well, that I think a lot of people didn't realize that Scott Bray was the guy who had approved this document, and that essentially encapsulates UAP in such a level of secrecy, it makes it very hard for people like me to get a hold of it. So committing to transparency, well, the jury's still out on that one, and we're about to see. It sounds good in a hearing, but again, I go back to that Navy appeal where they said, no, everything is classified, and I won that appeal. Now he's saying he commits to secrecy, but this is what we're faced with on the level of secrecy for that classification guide and what encapsulates UAP. So it's going to be very, very challenging to essentially extract this information and see them doing that willingly. Sharing with the public, I kind of laughed when he said that if it didn't encroach on sources and methods and so on and so forth, essentially if they with certainty could not connect it to a foreign adversary, which I understand not releasing information. So if the Russians knew they had something in off the coast of the Pacific, just to kind of give a quick example, what he means by that is Russians know they have something off the north end coast of the Pacific, right? So off the coast of Washington state. We film a UAP from an F-18 jet who's doing an exercise out there. We have no idea what it is. We blast it out there to the public, we meaning the government. Government blasts it out there to the general public and says off the coast of Washington on this particular date and time, this is what was seen. We have no idea what this thing is. Russia goes, oh, they were able to detect that. Oh, that was what they were able to capture. Oh, that was the quality of the sensor that captured either the video, the photograph, whatever. So there's a lot. That's an example of something. But let me remind all of you of how many cases they were able to pinpoint connected to a foreign adversary. 0. Not one. So based on what he just said, that rules out half of his excuse. The other part was that sources and methods. All right? Don't tell me the sensor. Don't tell me the location. Don't tell me any of that sensitive data on where that particular imagery was shot, but give the imagery. That's the only other part of his sources and methods. Now we don't know what the source is or the method it was captured in most cases. I mean, of course, there may be some video that you can discern what kind of capability it was from, but regardless, you're going to have some. So we should see all that, right? So if he's dedicated to transparency, my case for that database of the 400 cases, which by the way, I didn't mention, it also included getting every piece of visual imagery that coincides with every 400 cases that exist in that database. I said videos, I said photographs, I said sketches, and I probably put a couple other miscellaneous things. In other words, I was seeking it all. So if Scott here is being honest and he's committed to transparency, we're going to find out. How long will it take? I have put in a request for expedited processing, and I took a stab at a full fee waiver. I doubt that will get granted based on the volume of everything. They'll probably fight that one. But the expedited processing, essentially what that means is that I've demonstrated a clear interest by the general public and that I have proven a clear ability to disseminate that data to the public. The Navy, more than all else, to their credit, more than all other agencies and military branches, has granted more expedited processing requests on UAP and UFO requests that I've done than any other agency or military branch. So kudos to them. So I did a very similar worded request on this one, but I added more information post the UAP hearing, which I think further solidifies my case. So why I wanted to do that sidebar is to say now it's in congressional record that Scott Bray, the guy who approved what you're looking at here, the level of secrecy on UAP, it's going to be very hard for them to push back and go, no, sorry, we can't give you that database of 400. No, I'm going to fight that, because based on everything that Scott Bray has said through transparency, through his commitment, through what would stop him from allowing information to go out, I believe now we can solidify a case that a lot of that information, not all, I totally understand that, not all, but a lot, the majority even of those 400 cases should, by his own testimony, be released. We'll see if that actually happens, but the case is going.
And I'll just add, Congressman, just over the last 3-4 months, I think that the intelligence community and the national defense apparatus have disclosed more information on various events than it has in probably the previous 10 years. You have our commitment to work closely with the Director of National Intelligence and others in the declassification and downgrading of intel apparatus to ensure that we can get whatever information that we can out to the American people and to the public writ large.
Sounds good also. But when you actually look at his time frame, more than the last 10 years, well, nothing really happened. I got, random FOIA documents that have never come out before, if you want to call that a disclosure, but rather they have only disclosed, 3 videos that had already leaked before, another video now from the hearing that had already leaked before, and now a new video, which is pretty underwhelming. So you didn't have really a bar to meet to say we've done more in the last year or two than in the last 10 years. Well, there was no bar to be met because they didn't give out anything. So that was kind of silly, but it still solidifies now from Moultrie's position, which is pretty high in OUSDINS, that he is committed to transparency as well. And you better believe that goes in FOIA appeals and requests.
Do we have an
for
example? Can you cite a specific example of an object that can't be explained as having been human-made or natural?
I mean, the example that I would say that is still unresolved, that I think everyone understands quite well, is the 2004 incident from Nimitz. We have data on that, and it simply remains unresolved. Does not mean it resolves to being something, right, that is easily explainable or difficulty, or well, obviously it resolves to being something that is difficult to explain. But I can't point to something that definitively was not man-made, but I can point to a number of examples in which remain unresolved.
Fascinating exchange, because according to Bray, the Nimitz remains unexplained. Now, I know a lot of my, again, biggest haters, and why I bring them up is just to address the criticism head on. I'm not afraid of it. Often attack me for bringing up the possibility that the Nimitz encounter was rooted in some kind of classified technology or classified platform of some kind. And you know what? I actually still stand by it, and here's why. First, I want to stress, I've always said possibility. I've never said it is. I've never used that as a definitive. Always said it was a possibility. So for them to say that I tout the line that it's, some kind of classified tech, and I definitively say that has been an ongoing effort now for at least since the Showtime documentary, when I shot with Showtime and J.J. Abrams, where I posed that possibility, and my exact quote was possibility. There's been this effort to misquote me and mischaracterize what I've said. And it is what it is, but let me just clear that part up right now. But why I also kind of still say the possibility is there is we have to ask the question, and we don't have the answer to it. How much access does Scott Bray and his team, however big that is, how much access do they have to potentially special access programs or classified technology, even potentially highly classified? I mean, very classified pieces of platforms here that were utilized back almost 20 years ago. Would that stuff be available to him? I'd like to think that it would be. I'd like to think that they have all that access and unfettered everything that they would be able to access. Oh yeah, in 2004, we were testing this. All right, here we go. Case solved. We want to believe that, right? But it's not necessarily that we can, as the general public, prove that yet. Scott Bray may think that he has access to all of that. But keep in mind, if all of these government insiders that are coming out about OSAP and ATIP, and they were doing this with like very few people in the know, well, if all of that is true, then we have to actually accept the possibility that the same thing was going on back then with major tests of platforms. Likely a bigger list of people that were aware, but regardless, highly classified, highly secretive, and it doesn't mean just because 20 years have passed that, number one, it would be declassified already, and number two, that somebody in Scott Bray's position, who is highly cleared and probably knows a heck of a lot of secrets, would have access to that. So, some may not want to consider that possibility, hence why I have those haters that I do, and why they also fabricate what I say. But from an investigative standpoint, and I say that phrasing a lot, you can't rule it out, because not one congressman asked, Scott Bray, do you know about every classified program that has ever existed from the year 2004 on, so that if anything that you have collected can be attributed to one of those, you can conclusively say that? That would be a great question, yet we didn't hear that. So the access to the UAP Task Force and AIMSOG is still in question. We can hope, but it's not answered yet.
With regard to videos that have appeared in open source channels, for example, the Tic Tac video, does AIMSOG maintain control of videos, and how do you prevent leaks of potentially classified videos or other material?
So the AIMSOG, as we establish that organization, we will have a process for classified and compartmented holdings, and we will find a way of getting positive control over those. We have our sensitive access programs and special access programs that allow us to put what we call SAPs around things, and then there's controlled access programs that allow us to put caps around things. So we'll have that in place. Our goal will be ensuring that we're sharing that with the appropriate analysts and the appropriate exploiters, if you will, who can look at that data too. What we don't want to do is bring something into a DoD database or a DoD holding and then have so many wrappers around it, it's not available to those who really need to look at it and to exploit it. And that's one of the reasons we're establishing relationships with the interagency, with the IC and others to be able to do that, sir. But we will do our best to maintain positive control over the materials that we have within our holdings.
And there it is. That is the outcome of those leaks that everybody was so excited about, encapsulating all of this in a level of secrecy like a special access program, essentially closing it off to not only you and I, but a lot of people on the inside as well to protect that information. Remember that tweet that I wrote last year that I showed you guys earlier in this presentation, that shenanigans were afoot? Really think about the chain of events that happened. These things leak out to the general public, and it excites all of us, myself included. The Pentagon was, boom, right there to tell all of us they're real, being utilized by the UAP Task Force, and shot by our naval aviators. But they wouldn't tell us it was unidentified. Fast forward, now they've blown that out of the water. But based on the leaks, because that was the root of the question, based on those leaks, they are taking even more precautions, putting more levels of secrecy and encapsulating all of this in either a SAP or a SAP-like environment that cuts off access to the general public and those on the inside, and only giving access to those approved to be working on this effort. Really think about that. Those that are out there preaching about transparency and we're doing it and disclosure in this movement. And I love that movement from some of the angles and some of the people. That's exciting and motivating for all of us. But beware of the people that are telling you that it's all lifting, that we are on a pathway to disclosure. I heard that again in a podcast the other night. That disclosure is here. That was the other one. And in fact, an insult was even thrown indirectly my way. That some 15-year-old kid, this is all they had. And now disclosure is upon us, and I'm going to have to go work at Starbucks. That was actually the quote. Well, I'll be okay. I have a job outside of the Black Vault, and I work very hard on that. But I wouldn't mind if anybody needs to work at Starbucks. So that was a little demeaning to any baristas out there. But hey, all that aside, beware of those people, in my opinion. And it's because disclosure isn't here. Disclosure of what? I don't even know what they meant. But regardless, this is what we've now made for ourselves. By having those leaks happen, whether it was maliciously planned by somebody on the inside or accidentally done by those that have blasted it out there. But that chain of events that have built up the fascination about UAP that led to this hearing have now destroyed some of the best visuals that we had. Of course, there are still some that remain. I know that Nimitz is considered unidentified. So we still have some gems here, don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that those gems are about to see a level of secrecy that UAP in this present day effort hasn't seen yet. From the words of Moultrie himself to Congress saying, we'll make sure there's no leaks. We'll encapsulate it in a SAP or something to that effect. That's not good. So where do these people that have all the experience on the inside get off saying, this is it, disclosure's here? I don't get it. But it makes me intrigued on why they're saying it and why certain things are happening. I called it shenanigans last year. I'll call it shenanigans still. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and although some people consider that minutia and continue to chastise me for asking those questions, you can now see by the hearing that we just had, which was still monumental. There was still amazing stuff that came out. But now you can see how those unanswered questions that have come along the way for the last 3-4 years that have led us to this moment, there is a lot to celebrate about, but there's still a lot of questions. There's still a lot of information we don't know yet. There seemingly is this contradicting message that we are getting. And I don't know why, but it sure makes me excited to try and figure it out. So when I get any new updates or anything like that, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because I'll bring it to you here first. Make sure you also watch theblackvault.com. And again, if you are new to this channel, thumbs up and making sure you're subscribed are the biggest help that you can give me. I do have a Patreon link below. I said earlier in the presentation what that goes for. It's efforts like these. I show the receipts literally, so you guys know exactly what all of those super chats and Patreon donations and so on come in for. It goes right back into this channel, the content, the documents, and these types of FOIA requests and cases. So if you decide to do that, that is also a help. But again, thumbs up, subscribe, and pass the word. If you're listening to the audio version, thank you for doing that. If you don't know that there's a podcast, it's all under the Black Vault Radio, and you can access it on all of your favorite platforms out there, and reviews help me a lot. So thank you. Thank you for sitting through this deep dive into the UAP and UFO hearing. I hope my extra tidbits of information were helpful to you. And just one closing thought, it was very hard for me to pick the best comments out of the hearing. I believe it strung out to about 38 minutes out of the 90-minute presentation of what I considered highlights. But honestly, I had to cut that way down. So I would urge you, if you have that 90 minutes or so to spend, watch the hearing as a whole. You won't see my ugly mug. You won't hear my extra information. You can just focus on the hearing itself. And I'm curious to your thoughts. I've put that video as well on this channel, so make sure that if you do want to watch it, you can do so right here. And what are your thoughts? If you're on YouTube, put them down there. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. This is John Greenwald Jr. signing off, and we will see you next time.